Assalamu alaikum, my good friends. It's a fairly cloudy, rainy day my side, as you can see. And I hope you are well. I hope you are keeping warm and in the protection of Allah Almighty, in the protection of God. I want to discuss with you a very, very crucial and important topic that you cannot ignore if you read the Quran. And that is the idea of Satan. What is Satan? It's like a scary idea, scary term. We always think, it's this creature, this devil. But as students of the Quran, as people who are trying to make sense of the word of the Almighty Creator of the universe, we need to make sense of this concept. And this concept is there. It's on every other page in the Quran. It's in the Bible. It's in the Torah. The idea of Satan. In Arabic, the word Shaytan is used, and that is how the word appears in the Holy Quran. And so let me just stand still on this concept and let's make sense of it. Let us understand it not in a superstitious way, not in a way that was fictionalized, that was turned into some sort of fantastic creature by over creative minds in the past, but based purely on our common sense and on the words of the Holy Quran. So there's a very good summary in Wikipedia, actually, that I just point you to, where it actually just gives a brief summary of how the term appears in the Quran. And I just want to quickly go through that. 7 surahs in the Quran describe how God ordered all the angels and Iblis to bow before the newly created Adam. And continuing, all the angels bowed, but Iblis refused, claiming to be superior to Adam because he was made from fire, whereas Adam was made from clay. And that appears in chapter 7, A'raf. Early on in that chapter, that story is told of how Iblis became the rebel, became the first to disobey an instruction from God Almighty. Consequently, God expelled him from paradise and condemned him to Jahannam, which is the fire of hell. Iblis, therefore, or thereafter, became a kafir, an ungrateful disbeliever, whose sole mission is to lead humanity astray. God allows Iblis to do this because he knows that the righteous will be able to resist Iblis's attempts to misguide them. On Judgment Day, while the lot of Satan remains in question, those who followed him will be thrown into the fires of Jahannam. And after his banishment to paradise, Iblis, who thereafter became known as Shaytan, or the demon, lured Adam and Eve into eating of the forbidden fruit. This primary characteristic of Satan, aside from his hubris and despair, is his ability to cast evil suggestions, waswas, into men and women. And in the Quran we know that in one of the final chapters, yuwaswisu fi sudurinas, he whispers suggestions into the minds of people. 1545 states that Satan has no influence over the righteous, but that those who fall in error are under his power. 7156 implies that those who obey God's laws are immune to the temptations of Satan. 5679 warns that Satan tries to keep Muslims from reading the Quran, and 1698-100 recommends reciting the Quran as an antidote to Satan. And 3660 forbids humans from worshipping him. In the Quran, retelling the story of Job, Job knows that Satan is the one tormenting him. Now, there's also some interesting reflections by past scholars, and that is outside of the Quran. And so maybe one can just look at some of these prominent scholars. Hassan of Basra, an eminent Muslim theologian who lived in the 7th century, was quoted as saying, Iblis was not an angel even for the time of an eye wink. He is the origin of jinn, as Adam is of mankind. The medieval Persian scholar Abu al-Zamakhshari states that the words angels and jinn are synonymous. Okay, so that gives you an idea of just a quick survey of what these scholars and what the Quran has to say of the idea. And just as a final, just to look at the Quran also, how does the Quran treat the idea of Shaytan or Satan? Now there's a verse, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. فَدَلَّهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ فَلَمَّا ذَاقَ الشَّجَرَةَ بَدَتْ لَهُمَا سُوآتُهُمَا. He used deception to egg. This is here in chapter 7, verse 22, narrating the story of Adam and Eve, or Adam and Hawa, in being the newly evolved human species, right? And the newly evolved human species, in their state of felicity, in their state of pure innocence, in the uncontaminated, uncorrupted state, they appear in a different, they occur, or they live and they exist in a different state of being, uncontaminated. And then Satan comes, or Iblis comes, and sort of misguides them or misleads them. So this is the verse that fits into that story in the Quran. He used deception to egg them on. When they ended up tasting from the tree, their nakedness became apparent to them, and they took to attaching to themselves from the leaves of the garden. Their Lord called out to them, "Did I not limit you from that tree? Did I not tell you that Satan is clearly your enemy? وَأَقُلْ لَكُمَا إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمَا عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ وَأَقُلْ لَكُمَا إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمَا عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. And that is an idea or an example of the occurrence of this concept of Shaitan or Satan in the holy text, in the Holy Quran. And of course it appears at various places in the Quran, a number of places, as that Wikipedia article stated. So we need to make sense of the idea, as Zamakhshari, the way he explains it in that, looking at the article I just read to you, is that Satan and the angels are basically the same thing, but that Iblis is a rebellious angel, and that he actually took to disobeying God. So how does it make sense to us? Look, as people who read the Quran from a perspective of being rational and being logical about things, I want to offer you this explanation, right? And this is the explanation that I can draw from reading the Quran and from making sense of it. You see, let me do an analogy for you. Shaitan, or Satan, is like a tumor, right? It's like a cancerous tumor. It's also like inflammation. You see, these are both diseases. And when you speak about inflammation, you don't speak about my inflammation. Or you speak when you are extremely ill with a tumor. And, we know now that tumors are the result of inflammation. Continuous, ongoing inflammation really leads to tumorous growths in the body. And you never ever will say that my inflammation today is very bad. We don't use it like that. We externalize the sickness, the disease, as a intrusion into the body, right? So when we talk about inflammation, we say the inflammation. I wish I could get rid of this inflammation in my foot, or this inflammation in my shoulder, or heaven forbid that it should ever become a tumorous growth, a cancerous growth. Then we will not say my cancer, we will say the cancer, the tumor. We externalize the intrusion, the invasion, the foreign occupier into our bodies. Now, that is the analogy I want to offer you when it comes to the idea of Satan. You see, Satan is of you, but he's also not of you. He's you, but you gone wrong. You see, every molecule, every cell in that cancerous growth is produced by you, is produced by the food you eat, by the digestive system, by your, you feed that tumor. Do you know that? I mean, if you read some medical journals, you'll see that tumors and inflammation are really caused by the lifestyle, by the way that you treat yourself. And if you are feeding yourself the wrong things, if you are going to eat the wrong things, if you are going to refuse to do the right things, in other words, do the wrong things and don't do the right things when it comes to your body, to your own health, then you will be feeding the tumor, you will be feeding the inflammation. And inflammation, by the way, the inflammation comes from flame, inflamed, fire. And so my analogy is not too far off the mark. Inflammation is in fact a fire in your tissue. It's a burning of the, it's so called because of the heat that is generated in tumors and by inflammation. So that is the analogy I want to offer you today, is that although Shaytan is a part of you, we don't regard him. The Quran chooses to speak of Shaitan as if it is a foreign invader into your soul, into your psyche, into your mind, into your thinking, into your reflection, into the way you look at the world. Now, just as the body, your physiologically, just as you can become caught in pathology, in disease, in sickness, so the mind, so the soul can become caught in the middle of a sickness. And that is what Satan is. It is a sickness of the mind. It is a cancerous growth in the mind of people. Now, the two go often hand in hand, Often physical sickness, physiological disease, and mental disease go hand in hand. Because people are mentally unable to control and govern their own behavior, they allow for physiological sickness to also sort of overcome them. And that is that's an observation that I just want to add in here also. So when the Quran speaks about Shaitan, it actually externalizes the idea of that reflection, that thinking, that mindset that is not good, that is bad, that is disruptive, that is destructive. And we should not allow that invasion of our thought processes, of our reflection. We should not allow Shaitan to penetrate and to set up sort of station inside our minds. And that is really how these verses will make sense. So if we look at the story of Adam and Eve, it's not as if, when I look at the story, I look at it as if it is a particular diseased or a incorrect or an erroneous way of thinking that penetrated the thinking of Adam and Eve. And that erroneous, that corrupted way of thinking is really what we externalize as Satan. Now, the Quran uses a lot of metaphor. We know that the Quran mentions it in chapter 2 that metaphor is very much a part of the Quran. And so the mutashabihat and the muhkamat. So the mutashabihat ayat, or the metaphorical verses, are often there to turn ideas that are complex, to use simple sort of illustrations to make those complex ideas palatable or easily understandable. And so for the Quran to personify that diseased way of thinking, that wrong way of reflecting on the world, reflecting on ourselves, a false consciousness, instead of trying to become extremely theoretical about the idea of that false consciousness or that false sense of reflection, it refers to it as Satan, or a satanic and a pure evil way of allowing that pure evil to penetrate your thinking or to create suggestions in your mind. Now, from sociology or from social science, what I want to add is that we often look at the problems of society and we bring it back as a social science as someone who has written or has done research in the field of social science. What we often do is we relate problems to problems in people's agency. So agency is the propensity of people to act in a determined or an effective or effectual way in their surroundings, right? So that is agency. It is the propensity, the ability I have to act with effect in the world. So in other words, I'm an autonomous individual. I can make decisions that will affect my destiny and the destiny of those who are under my control. And so that is agency. But problems with agency arises when people are unable to put together a meaningful way in which to act. So when people are unable to act meaningfully, we call that a problem with reflexivity. Reflexivity is the ability to mount a carefully and well conceived or constructed idea in your head. That is reflexivity. The ability to construct a healthy plan or intention in your mind, given the reality that you are dealing with, right? That is reflexivity. So reflexivity leads to action. Reflexivity and agency are connected. With healthy reflexivity, there will be healthy agency, right? If you are able to mount healthy, constructive thoughts, your actions or your behavior will be healthy and constructive. So when agency is not functioning properly, it is normally related back to reflexivity. It means our thought processes are not functioning healthy. And then we call it a problem with reflexivity. And that could be a fracturing, an impedance, a damaging of the processes, thought processes. And having done research in colonialism and the effect on the colonial subjects or the victims of colonialism, especially in Africa, in South Africa, one of the findings that I made in my research is that colonialism left damage on the ability of the victim nation to reflect constructively on the real world challenges that face them. So the ability of people to mount a constructive way of looking at challenges is damaged. That ability is damaged. For the oppressor nation or the colonial nation, of course, they are trained to mount a reaction or a positive, constructive way of dealing with real world challenges. But that ability is taken away from the subject nation. And so you have the impedance of reflexivity. Now, Shaytan, as I want to relate it back to you in terms of this verse of the Quran, or in terms of the definition of Shaytan, Shaytan is an impedance, is a damage, is a cancer on the reflexivity, the healthy reflexivity of human beings. And that cancer, that impedance, that damage can come in various forms. At a very mild level, it could be sort of, using the analogy again, an inflammation, just a damaging or a suppression of the healthy intellectual functioning. But at an extreme level, it could be a permanent cancerous, tumorous growth within the healthy functioning of human beings. And then people are unable, they become terminally incapable of mounting a healthy response to real world challenges. My friends, I've become a little bit too technical here, but I hope you've stayed with me and you understand with me what is Shaitan. The metaphor is that Shaitan is some creature out there. Who knows? Obviously, there can't be 8 billion shaitans running around in the world for every human being. So Shaitan is much more metaphorical description of a invasive, an invasive intrusion and impedance of the healthy thinking and the sane minds of humanity. And that is what we should do. We should at all times avoid that invasive ways of thinking, that rebellious ways of thinking, which feeds off us. It feeds off the food of Shaitan. As the food of a tumor and of inflammation is refined carbohydrates, is sugars, the food of Shaitan would be things like envy, would be greed, would be anger, would be jealousy, would be desperation, hopelessness, despair. Those features, when they are present, they feed the demon in you. And remember what I said, what that demon is. It is that invasive sickness in the way that you reflect and in the way that you view the world. And the remedy is to avoid envy, to avoid greed, to avoid boundless anger, to avoid indifference, a cold-hearted attitude, and to replace those with meditation, with reflection on God, reflection on nature, reflection on what is good, wholesome, and constructive, being with people in a kind way, in a positive way. Those are the antidotes to the onslaught and the invasion of Shaitan. But if you're going to busy yourself with unnecessary, destructive behavior, practices, habits, then you will be inviting Shaitan. Remember the analogy between Shaitan, feeding Shaitan as you feed the disease. You need to stop feeding the disease. You need to feed yourself the antidote to the disease. And that is what will eradicate Shaitan from your life. As the Qur'an said, as we read in that article, those who feed themselves with spiritually, those who feed themselves with righteousness, with justice, with kindness, with decency, are immune to the onslaught of the devil. Just as those people who live a healthy life, who eat healthy, who do the exercise, are pretty much immune to a large extent to the onslaught of disease. I hope that clarified to you the idea of Shaitan, my brothers and sisters. Whether Shaitan is some angel or some demon out in the universe, I'm not looking, that is, I leave open to you to research that. Maybe you can add your comments in the comment section. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.